Hello, it's 7 o'clock. This is Sky News Breakfast. Our top stories here this morning. More disruption for travellers as hundreds of train drivers strike, while on the roads, drivers are warned to prepare for congestion.
And I'm at London's Paddington station, where the summer of strikes continues.
Another blow to Rishi Sunak as former Tory leadership contender Tom Tugendhat backs Liz Truss in the race to be Prime Minister. At least 23 people are killed in flooding in the US state of Kentucky, and the governor warns it could take weeks to find all the victims. An utter tragedy. 2 people are arrested over the killing of a 9-year-old girl. On the cusp of history, excitement and anticipation ahead of the Euro 2022 final as the Lionesses inspire the next generation.
And it makes me feel much braver for them to do it, so it makes me feel braver to do it myself.
And at 6:45, we'll take a look at the papers with the anthropologist Mariana Hotter and the broadcaster Pete Price. Hello, a very good morning to you. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Travellers are facing disruption this morning, both on the railways and on the roads. Thousands of train drivers will strike across the country today. Members of the union ASLEF at 7 train operators will walk out for 24 hours over pay. The strike involves 9 train operators and more than 5,000 staff. ASLEF has announced a second one-day strike at 9 train companies on Saturday, the 13th of August. The RMT union is also planning 2 further strikes in August on the 18th and 20th. And further disruption for travellers in London, with underground workers now set to walk out between the Network Rail strikes on August the 19th. Well, joining me now from Paddington station in central London is our correspondent Milena Veselinovic. So, Milena, how much impact is this drivers' strike likely to have today, do you think?
It will be huge. We're already hearing of passengers whose plans are in tatters, and it only comes after a couple of days since that RMT strike that brought the whole network to pretty much a standstill. But ASLEF union members say that they simply haven't had a pay rise since 2019, many of them, which, because of inflation, means that effectively their wages have fallen. They want the wages to rise in line with the cost of living. And their General Secretary, Mick Whelan, says that members simply want to be able to afford in 2022 with their wages what they could afford in 2021. They have also accused the rail operators, the companies, of failing to negotiate properly. They say this is the last resort. Now, on the other hand, the Rail Delivery Group, which represents rail companies, has actually accused ASLEF of timing this industrial action to coincide with some pretty major sporting events like the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, as well as the first day of the English Football League. Whatever it is, there's more rail misery travel to come. There's another strike by ASLEF in August, 2 more by the RMT, as well as the London Underground walkout on the 19th of August.
Milena, thanks very much indeed. Well, to the roads now, and the AA has issued its first amber traffic warning as major roads across the UK were hit by congestion yesterday. The warning will take effect again between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. today due to a combination of rail strikes, the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham and the start of the Football League season in England. Meanwhile, Britain and France have announced plans to prevent further disruption at the border. Last weekend, tens of thousands of families had their cross-channel journeys ruined by gridlock traffic and hour-long delays. But a new working group has been established and will meet weekly during the summer to prevent a repeat of the disruption. Well, joining me now is Toby Howe, tactical lead for the Kent Resilience Forum. Welcome to you. So, a horrendous weekend last weekend around the port of Dover in particular. How do you feel about this weekend? How's it looking at the moment? Does it look like it's going to be just as congested?
Not at the moment. No, things are looking OK at the moment. Yesterday was really good. Traffic flowed. Tens of thousands of tourists that were able to cross the channel yesterday had limited delays at either portal, but the traffic was flowing, which was really good.
And So is that the end of the problem? What went wrong, do you think, last weekend?
Really, it was a combination of things that, as well reported by yourselves, there was a shortage of resource at the Port of Dover initially over the Thursday night into Friday. And then we had a serious crash on the M20 as well on Friday. So those two things together really caused major problems. We had a huge backlog that couldn't get through, and we had to spend the whole weekend really playing catch up to get all of that backlog, the poor people that were queuing for ages, the impact it had on residents of Kent, etc., to get it back to how it should be again.
Well, yes, and there was a big row over the course of the weekend, wasn't there, with the UK saying there weren't enough French border staff, and the French pointing out that Brexit meant that passport checks took longer. I mean, what's your view? Is the infrastructure in place? If there's the right number of staff there, does it all work well enough, or is the port in need of expansion of some kind?
We do in Kent need better facilities, really, because there is only limited space down at the Port of Dover. There's limited space at Eurotunnel. So you can't add more booths as they can in France, where they've got a lot more space, for example. So it is really difficult to manage. So it only takes the issues that we had last weekend and the fluidity of the freight and tourist crossing the channel comes to a halt. So it is really difficult, but we do need more infrastructure, and there's a lot of work going on to sort of really push government to help Kent out.
So basically, you need more lanes for people to pass through to get their passports checked. Now that they have to be stamped, that process does take a bit longer.
Yeah, ideally, but there isn't any more space to put more lanes in. So we need to look at what could be done. Can we have sort of holding areas outside the ports? Can we have a lorry park? Could we have a facility for tourists to be able to go through these processes before they actually get to the port? Because there physically is no more room within the port to add more lanes.
And we've heard, as I just said in our introduction, that there is a new working group that's been put together to try to make sure that the summer passes without a repeat of the problems we saw last weekend. What kind of difference do you think that could make?
Well, I mean, we've seen the difference already this weekend. Yesterday, as I say, we had really good resilience from the French border force at both Eurotunnel and the Port of Dover, so therefore traffic was able to flow. We've had that again last night, so we've got minimal delays this morning at the moment. So obviously there were really good discussions that have been successful last week to get that to happen.
And of course, everyone wants to avoid the queues for freight companies, especially if they're carrying perishable goods. You don't want to be stuck in a queue. A nightmare for anyone going on holiday as well, having that kind of hold up, but also an impact on local people too. Give us an idea. You're based in Kent. What it's like being in Dover when there are all these queues of traffic around.
It's been horrendous for local residents, for local businesses, and the tourist industry in Kent alone, really, as well, because these impacts aren't of Kent's making, yet it is Kent that suffers. Our tourist industry is down on visitors last weekend. Residents have taken a long time to be able to get to shops. Community nurses struggle to get to patients, etc. So it is a huge impact on the county of Kent and the residents and businesses of Kent. And that's why we need more help from government to assist with this national problem.
Well, Toby Howe, very interesting to talk to you this morning. Let's hope those roads stay free-flowing for the rest of the weekend. For the moment, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, Liz Truss has picked up the backing of the former candidate Tom Tugendhat in the race to become the next Tory leader and Prime Minister. It's the second high-profile endorsement of the Foreign Secretary in 24 hours after the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, said he was backing her in the race for number 10 too. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, has more.
Liz Truss has today received another big boost for her leadership campaign with the second major endorsement in 24 hours. After the backing of the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, today Tom Tugendhat, who chairs the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and was one of the early candidates in the race for the Tory crown, he's backing Liz Truss too. Mr Tugendhat writes in The Times that the Foreign Secretary's promises of tax cuts are based on true Conservative principles and that she can unite the party. And Mr Tugendhat says this: Liz has always stood up for British values at home and abroad. With her at the helm, I've no doubt we'll move with determination to make this country safer and more secure. Well, today, Liz Truss is turning her attention to domestic matters with a pledge to unlock home ownership, she says, for generation rent. She's going to seek to incorporate rental payments into mortgage assessments as part of the government's upcoming mortgage review. Mr. Sunak, meanwhile, is embarking on a move which some will see as a sign of desperation as he lags well behind Liz Truss now. He's setting out a bold vision to protect British freedoms, he says. It'll be seen as a war on woke. He says he'll outline his plan to make sure mothers and women are not erased from public life, children are shielded from inappropriate material at school, and freedom of speech is protected. But with these latest endorsements, particularly Mr. Tugendhat today, Liz Truss is pulling away in this leadership race.
And a reminder that Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss will go head-to-head in a live televised debate here on Sky News. Kay Burley will be hosting the programme on Thursday, the 4th of August at 8 p.m. And if you'd like to be a member of the live studio audience and be in with a chance of asking a question, do please apply by scanning the QR code on your screen now, or you can go via the link on the Sky News app and website. Ukraine has called for the United Nations and the Red Cross to be allowed to investigate the deaths of more than 50 Ukrainian prisoners of war in an attack in occupied territory. The Red Cross said it's seeking access to the prison camp in Olenivka, which is controlled by the Russian-backed separatist Donetsk People's Republic, in order to help with evacuating and treating the wounded. Ukraine says the site was targeted by Russia in an effort to destroy evidence of torture and killing. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said he's open to discussing a prisoner swap deal proposed by the United States. It's thought the deal would see notorious Russian weapons supplier Victor Bout exchanged for former US Marine Paul Whelan and the US basketball star Brittany Griner, who are both being detained in Russia. He discussed a number of issues with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in a frank telephone call on Friday. To the United States now, where at least 23 people, including a number of children, have died in severe flooding in Kentucky. Heavy rains have caused flash flooding and mudslides in eastern parts of the state. Kentucky's governor says it could take weeks to find all the victims. Our US correspondent Mark Stone reports.
From the air, Kentucky's governor absorbed the damage below. One community of many where they will have to start again if they survived. The number known not to have made it continues to rise. Victims of flash floods which swamped these small Appalachian towns in minutes. These are some of the poorest communities in America.
It's bad, it really is. We been a fireman almost 27 years, and this is the worst I've ever seen it. People unaccounted for. Probably 95% of the people in this area here has lost everything. Houses, cars, animals. It's heartbreaking, it really is.
Scores have been airlifted from homes cut off, and it's not just the floods, mudslides too. Hundreds of homes have been destroyed. Another unprecedented, catastrophic weather event. And again, whole communities wiped out, and it's feared entire families too.
We had to swim out, and it was cold. It was over my head, so yeah, it's scary.
Roads have been washed away, power lines down, the mobile signal cut. All of it makes the rescue effort that much harder. President Biden has now declared this a major disaster, unlocking federal funding and personnel. It is only 7 months since he did the same for the same state after tornadoes ripped this place apart.
Well, in some areas, the water is receding as fast as it arrived, and that's clearly good news for emergency crews like this one, a federal crew provided by the federal government that have been working very, very hard throughout the day to try and save more people and recover those who've lost their lives.
We've got at least 6 dead children, and that's hard. It's even harder for those families and those communities, and it's going to grow from there. From everything we've seen, We may be updating the count of how many we lost for the next several weeks.
For now, the focus is on rescuing. They hope more will be found alive, but the number of dead may double, and more rain is expected. Mark Stone, Sky News in Kentucky.
And Mark has the latest for us now from the city of Jackson in Kentucky.
Well, you saw in my report there a snapshot from across this area. We've now come to one particular town which has been pretty badly hit. This is Jackson, and you can see what was, I guess, a parking lot. And for an idea of just how much water is still here, look carefully, because those two things there are the roofs of vehicles completely submerged. And as we move around, you can see more vehicles. One of the stories that we've heard repeated, reports of people having been trapped in their vehicles as the water came very, very quickly and they needed to get out. People trapped in their houses as well. One very, very tragic story of a family that moved up onto the roof of their building because there was so much water coming. The parents, though, were unable to hold on to 4 of their children as the building beneath them collapsed, and those 4 children very tragically have lost their lives.
Well, with parts of the world experiencing extreme weather conditions, let's take a look at the impact of climate change on the planet and our data dashboard you can see there. And the right half of the screen tells you how the UK's power is currently being produced. And on the top left, you can see how much warmer the Earth is now than in 1880, the Industrial Revolution, when modern record keeping began, and that figure currently at 1.25 degrees. And the bottom left is the amount of CO2 emissions we're pumping out in millions of tonnes, and it's ticking up all the time. Also making the news, a 9-year-old girl stabbed to death in Boston in Lincolnshire has been named as Lilia Valutita. She has been described by family friends as a young, beautiful angel. It's still unclear what happened, but police have arrested 2 people as part of a murder investigation. A 19-year-old woman with a severe eating disorder has died 2 months after a judge ruled that doctors could lawfully stop providing her with artificial nutrition and hydration. The teenager's death was announced by the Court of Protection yesterday, with a judge describing the case as tragic and deeply distressing. The teenager had suffered mental health challenges for more than a decade. A new report says that all children needing NHS mental health services must have a guarantee to be seen within 4 weeks or the next day for those at risk of self-harm and suicide. The study from the Commission on Young Lives said the current system is buckling under pressure and called for a huge cash injection. So we've got sport in a moment with Jackie, and I'm very jealous. You're going to Wembley tomorrow, aren't you? It's going to be very exciting.
I know. It's going to be a day of days. What I'm wondering is, what are the girls doing today? Because obviously it's not going to be a heavy training session. How do you calm your nerves when it's going to be the biggest day of your life? Lauren Hemp...
Love Island, maybe?
Yeah, Love Island, definitely. Lauren Hemp does Lego. So hopefully she's got a new set to keep her busy.
Maybe she can build her own little Wembley stadium.
But, you know, what kind of Lego? Because, you know, if you go too big, you can't finish it. That would also be an issue.
And you'd have to be frustrated just before the match.
There's so many things to think of. Anyway, how are your nerves? Are they OK? Too soon? England tomorrow, the Lionesses facing off against Germany for the right to be crowned European champions. It's a repeat of the 2009 final, but by the time the 2 teams take to the field at Wembley, there'll be 6 times as many fans there to watch. Here's Aisha Saheed.
As the Lionesses prepare for tomorrow's big game, the chance of victory feels closer than ever. Midfielder Georgia Stanway is signed to Bayern Munich, but tomorrow she'll be playing against Germany for her national team on home turf.
At the start of the tournament, if somebody had said we'd have got this far, we'd have snapped their hand off and we'd have took it. And yeah, I just feel like we're in such a good place. We've dominated the games that we've played so far. Our confidence is really high, belief in ourselves really high. So yeah, we're just looking forward to Sunday. We know how special it's going to be just for football in general. The stadium's going to be packed out. The fans are going to be loving it.
Germany have taken the title 8 times. They last played England during the Women's Euro final in 2009. The big difference between then and now? Back then it was to a crowd of 15,000. Tomorrow it will be nearly 6 times the size at sold-out Wembley Stadium. There's never been so much excitement around women's football, and here they share a special connection. This is the first pitch captain Leah Williamson played on, and the next generation of Lionesses are feeling inspired.
They make me feel much braver for them to do it, so it makes me feel braver to do it myself.
They've actually been quite inspirational. I've watched them play, and they're probably the ones who got me into playing football. I think it's super inspirational because I feel like all girls should be able to play football, not just boys and stuff.
The competition may not be over yet, but here they're already seeing the knock-on effects.
The reaction has been really good. You can hear the girls, whereas before it was talking about the men's football team, you know, the Grealishes, the Mounts, you know, those Sackers, those sort of people. But now there's been like the Meads, the Williamsons, you know, so it's really caught the eye. And like I say, it can only be good for the girls' game.
So will football finally be coming home? Regardless of what happens at Wembley tomorrow, one thing's for certain, these Lionesses will leave a lasting legacy. Aisha Zahid, Sky News.
The supermarket giant Asda has announced a 5p cut in the price of unleaded petrol, providing a small respite for consumers hit by the cost of living. But the crisis continues to have a devastating ripple effect in communities across the UK. People feeling the pinch are cutting back on their spending, leading to local businesses closing down. Insolvencies in Yorkshire have gone up by 30% in a year. Our chief North of England correspondent Greg Minham reports from Bradford on the struggle to stay afloat.
We'd been warned this was coming to Britain's high streets. A fish and chip shop in Bradford, driven out of business by the economic squeeze. This is the cost of living crisis, and it's spreading. Another shop in Bradford forced to close, the shutters coming down on a place much loved by customers who simply couldn't afford it anymore. What Ursula Sutcliffe started with £100, a place of plants, coffee and community, now being packed up for good.
People had come out and then changed their mind. They thought, that's it. So they've completely changed the habits. And even though people were supporting you, sometimes online or just from a distance sending you well wishes, it wasn't transcending into sales. I just needed to bow out while I had something left in me to bow out with. I was scared that it were going to completely take me down and have no chance of ever coming back again. The disaster's coming. I said it to you before, and I've said it to people many a time. I truly, truly believe the foundations of this country are cracked. Who is this country actually looking after? Because it don't feel like it's us. People are desperate in England in 2022 who work full-time and have always worked full-time, and they're desperate. It's actually disgusting. And there's no care. Like, where's the care gone from this country?
Analysts say corporate insolvencies in this region are up 30% this year. Across the country, they're up by nearly a half. The fear that companies wouldn't survive rising costs and falling income is now becoming a reality.
We've been in touch with half a dozen businesses who've gone under recently who didn't want to speak publicly because they say they feel ashamed, embarrassed. One said they felt like a failure, but there was simply no way for them to carry on.
Where demand is growing is places like this, the stores of free food donated to those in need. And that, says Abdul, is a growing number of people with full-time jobs.
Since the original announcement of the energy prices going up, there's just been a huge demand. And we're getting working class people coming in now. There's people just on benefits before. But we've got working class, we've got nurses, we've got quite a lot of people coming in, a lot of social workers coming in. Because everyone's struggling. It's affecting everyone now.
It's scary because a year ago I went self-employed. I was a teacher, so I work from home, I'm a childminder.
Jo, like most of us, is making choices she never had to think about before.
It's always on my mind, the cost of fuel, how many times I can boil the kettle in the day. It is literally always on my mind. And what I often do is I do my shopping a week in advance, book my slot on my food shop, and then I'll go in the night before and cut out anything that we don't definitely need. So any extras just get cut out.
They are necessary choices being made by millions of people. And for a growing number of businesses, impossible to survive. Greg Milam, Sky News, Bradford.
The Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary Dominic Raab has visited the site of the new Secure School in Kent, which has replaced an old secure training centre. When complete, it's hoped that it will be a major leap forward in youth custody, aimed at addressing a lack of education in young offender institutions. The critics say young people shouldn't be imprisoned at all. Emma Birchley reports.
2 years ago, the doors slammed shut here for good, and the young offenders aged 12 to 17 locked up inside were moved elsewhere. Now Medway Secure Training Centre in Kent has been gutted, ready for a new future as the country's first secure school. It was a photo opportunity for the Deputy Prime Minister at the start of what's seen as a groundbreaking new era in youth justice.
What you've got here at Medway is effectively a school with prison walls around it, rather than being inside a prison or a youth offender institute with just an education unit tacked on. And that is the difference, and that is the ethos change and the regime change that you'll see in a place like this.
An inspection before the closure revealed a significant increase in the use of force, including pain-inflicting techniques. And once again, the centre was rated inadequate. It's taken some time to get to this stage. It was back in 2016 that the idea of secure schools was put forward following a national review of youth custody services. The plan was to provide enhanced education and rehabilitation for young people in what was described as a therapeutic environment. The man who founded the charitable trust that will run Oasis Restore, as it's called, says what's planned is a revolution.
You can't help somebody by harming them. You can't take those who've been psychologically wounded through trauma, through violence, through neglect, through abuse, and somehow hope that by punishing them and locking them up for long enough, they'll emerge renewed people. It doesn't work. So this is a whole new approach to working with young people to bring healing to them.
It'll be at least 3 years behind schedule and at an estimated cost of around £36 million, more than 7 times over budget. But the team that'll actually run this place has high hopes.
What's really important for us is that we not only provide them with the tools to succeed when they do go back into their communities, but we also provide them with the something to do, which would be going into education, further education, employment, training or apprenticeship routes.
49 young people will live here in what are almost like flats, with their own ensuite rooms, breakout areas and shared kitchen and laundry. But there are those who say young people shouldn't be locked up at all.
We'd like to see greater resourcing for diversion for young people away from offending, away from crime, which inherently involves building on the education opportunities in our local communities.
This is the only secure school planned so far. The search for a second site begins next year. If it's successful, it's likely to become the blueprint for many more. Emma Birchley, Sky News, Kent.
Let's get more now on our top story and the rail strike that's taking place across the country today. Joining me now is the General Secretary of ASLEF, Mick Whelan. A very good morning to you. ASLEF, of course, representing the train drivers that are on strike today. So tell us why they're striking.
Well, after 3 years, no pay rise, our members feel that with the cost of living crisis, like every other worker in the country, they're being impacted and they deserve their opportunity to be allowed to at least talk to the people they work for who are making massive profits this moment in time to have the pay rise they deserve.
Well, yes, and on the issue of pay, the Department of Transport is quite keen to point out that train drivers, they say, are paid quite well. They say they're earning just under £60,000 a year. As they put it, more than twice the UK average and significantly more than the very workers who'll be impacted most by these strikes. What do you say to that?
Well, we've never engaged a race to the bottom. There's been a massive media campaign by the government and DfT to demonise train drivers in the last 3 or 4 months. We believe those in the public sector should have what we have. But it's always been the case in the past that if we don't take a pay rise, do they give it to the nurses? Do they give it to the firefighters? Do they give it to anybody else? This is just creating the politics of envy. The reality is there's a cost of living crisis, and after 3 years, people believe they deserve a pay rise.
I mean, the government's argument has been, hasn't it, about matching pay rises with inflation, that in itself can be inflationary. And there are a huge number of industries that are suffering exactly the same issues. With inflation so high, they need a big pay rise to match that. Do you have any kind of understanding of that bigger picture or any sympathy with that bigger picture at all?
Well, what if it was accurate? You know, profitability in most companies has gone up by 73%. What's driving inflation is government policy and high profiteering. If you actually look at the figures on pay, as you've highlighted, pay hasn't gone up, so it's not pay that's driving inflation.
And what about how this moves forward? The government is saying that you have no interest in holding constructive talks. What is the latest on that?
Well, I wish the government would stop lying, and I wish Mr Shapps would tell the truth. What's happened is that the government has kept the privateers in the industry, done deals with them, given them contracts, allow them to make hundreds of millions of pounds, but in those contracts they've written in that we can't have a pay rise above 2%. And when we talk to the employers, they say the government won't let us talk to you, and when we talk to the government, they say it's nothing to do with them. So the only way to get out of this catch-22 situation is for the government to stop lying, and that deal possibly to be ripped up, and now be allowed to talk to the employers, which are private employers. We don't work for the government, and we don't work for the DfT. We work for Arriva, we work for First Group, we work for Trentalia. We work for all those rail companies that still happily operate within the rail system and hope to make money out of it going forward. We work for profit-making companies that are not allowed to talk to us about what we need.
Well, yes, because Grant, as you say, the government says that's not true, don't they? Grant Shapps is insistent that this issue is in the hands of the railway bosses. He says that the government sets the overall mandate for the public service, but it's for the employer and for the unions to negotiate, and there's no need for the unions to speak to anyone but the employer. They don't need to talk to the government.
Well, it's a matter of public record that some of those contracts have been published, and up to 22 clauses in those contracts state that they can't offer anything without the agreement of the government. The government that we don't work for, we work for private companies. So you tell us who we're negotiating with, who we're allowed to negotiate with, how it can work, when it can work, and when Mr Shapps and his team are going to start telling the truth.
What about the timing of this strike? Obviously, it comes a few days after the RMT strikes, and it's also coinciding with various sporting events. We've got the Commonwealth Games going on at the moment. It's also the first day of the English Football League resuming. Was the timing deliberate?
So if we were trying to target the Commonwealth Games, I'm a former regional officer of the Midlands, we'd have targeted the opening ceremony or the days that people travel to the Games. Most people going to the Games that are going to stay there and be there for a number of days are already there. If we'd have done it next Saturday, we'd have been accused of attacking the Premiership and other things. We don't normally target sporting events because we want people to enjoy their leisure. Most of what we do is built around our members' working patterns, believe it or not.
What about the future? Grant Shapps is laying out plans to curb industrial action, make it harder to strike. What do you make of that? What's your reaction to that?
Look, we're very much rushing into a situation whereby all the politics that happened in the mid-30s in Spain and Italy and elsewhere, where they curbed the voice of protest, where they curbed civil liberties, where they tried to take away human rights, where they attacked trade unions, drove us into a very, very right-wing world, which I don't hope most people in this country don't want. The reality is that we already had the worst trade union laws in Europe other than Lithuania before the last trade union bill, before the protest bill, and if they don't want the people of this country to be able to say what they think about either their government, their employers or their futures, then we are living in a very sad society.
And do you feel that you have the backing of Labour? How do you feel that Labour has handled these strikes?
Labour have been, in the whole, supportive. I think the decision earlier this week in relation to Sam Tarry was wrong, and I publicly said that. But our reality is that we haven't been condemned by the Labour Party. But also, it's not just about rail. We're seeing BT on strike, we're seeing barristers on strike, we've seen many GMB members on strike, we've seen Unite members on strike, there's been numerous other ballots, and we've seen lecturers that are out on strike, the ECU, we send them as solidarity. We're seeing the NEU now balloting for strike action. The whole of the workers across the society in the UK are dissatisfied at this moment in time. It's not just rail workers.
Well, Mick Whelan, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks very much indeed for talking us through that. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed.
You're watching Sky News Breakfast. We've got the papers for you coming up. We're going to go through the front pages with the anthropologist Mariana Hotter and the broadcaster Pete Price. So stay with us. Now, we're going to take you through the papers now. Here with us to review them are the anthropologist Mariana Hotter and the broadcaster Pete Price. So welcome back to both of you. Good to see you there. Marianne, you want to pick out the Guardian's front page to kick us off. And this Tory leadership battle has got a lot of coverage. It's still got a long way to go as well. But it looks like Rishi Sunak is trailing if you look at the polls of Tory members. So what's the Guardian suggesting that he might do next to try to win them round?
Yeah, that's right. So if you look at the electorate as a whole, everyone in the UK, then they're neck and neck, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak in terms of popularity. But if you look at Conservative voters, Liz Truss is heading potentially for a victory. So Rishi Sunak appears to be, I don't know, pulling out all the stops, if you will, kind of going to those slightly murkier areas, which are maybe not quite as centrist for Conservative values, but perhaps kind of rally some degree of grassroots support. So a few days ago, quoting that he was going to stop left-wing agitators from bulldozing British values. Now, what does he mean by that? Things like pulling down historic figures, replacing the school curriculum with anti-British propaganda, and rewriting the English language so you can't even use words like man, woman or mother anymore without causing great offence. Oh, and you think, my immediate thought, Anna, is, oh, come on, Rishi, you are better than that. And also, come on, Conservative Party members, surely you're better than that as well. This should not appeal to you because it's nonsense. I mean, and he then says that he has zero interest in provoking culture wars. And you go, well, what exactly do you think that was then? And it diminishes debate. It makes us all sound like polarised, racist idiots. And I think that regardless of whether you're a member of the Conservative Party or not, these people are going to be, one of these people is going to be our Prime Minister. The tone of the conversations that we have about how we move our country forwards to a position of success rather than a position of recession, inflation, economic downfall is important. And I think turning on each other is definitely not the way to do it. So, I mean, we've seen a week of sort of blue on blue attacks, and now we're seeing a kind of right wing, left wing polarization, vilifying the enemy. We're not the enemy. And I think party politics just doesn't represent most people's experience in the UK today.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think people are that polarised or radical in their thoughts. They're just more thoughtful.
Yeah, and weeks of it to come. So it'll be interesting to see how much of those attacks or not happen. Pete, I'm going to move us on. We've got very little time for this particular section, I'm afraid. But there's a story about Will Smith that you've picked out from the Daily Mail, months on from that famous slap at the Oscars.
You just summed up the story there, months on. 4 months later, he's apologised and said, I'm here if you want to take my apology. I'm just gobsmacked. 4 months on, it takes a man to apologise. He's done himself a lot of damage. He knows he's done a lot of damage, and that's why he's got to apologise now. But it's too late, too little, too late. It was a disgrace. He sent out shockwaves within the industry. And I mean, violence, he's got a huge following, and he's sending out violence to kids. And I just thought it was terrible. 4 months later, I think he's a disgrace.
It was a very shocking moment, wasn't it? And I think he says in the video that he made of the apology, I think he said Chris Rock wasn't quite ready to speak to him yet. Who knows when that might happen. Marianne, let's clip along at a pace and move to the front of the FT. I haven't got it in front of me, so you're going to have to talk me through this, but it's about China and the cost of living, isn't it?
Yeah, right. So this is Tony Danker, who's the head of the Confederation of British Industry, the CBI. And he's basically saying that lots of British companies are rethinking their supply chains and trying to disentangle themselves from China because they're basically worried that there's a new a sort of a souring of East-West relations. That's the kind of the flavour in Washington. Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak, whoever's going to become Prime Minister, will possibly sort of double down on that, so that those strained relationships between the UK, the US, the West and China are going to be worse off. And so companies are going to have to look for where they source their products from. And that basically, bottom line, is bad for business, but it's also going to be more expensive. It's going to drive up inflation. So government needs to listen to business. Tony Danker's absolutely right.
I'm going to move and ask you in about 10 seconds to ask whether or not you watched the last episode of Neighbours. It's inside tomorrow's Mirror, Pete. In a word, did you see it?
In a word, yes, I did see it, and I went on a pilgrimage to Ramsay Street. That's what a fan I was.